Good morning, good morning. All right, we are on chapter 9 of the Elk Mountain Mission. And last time, we learned about how the second main group going down, so not the exploratory group, but now the main group that was going down to establish a fort, a colony, etc., they were shown a cutoff through the Castle Valley, the bigger Castle Valley, that was south of Cedar Mountain, but north of the San Rafael Canyon kind of stuff, and saved a couple of days' journey. But now we're on the Land of Promise, chapter 9. The next day was Sunday, the 3rd of June. The missionaries were happy to observe the Sabbath and rest from their labors. That trip across the Castle Valley had taken them a full week. John McEwen said, "Our teams are nearly worn down with fatigue for want of sufficient feed and water. The men suffered this week for want of good water." After their scorching forced march of the day before, the Mormons found the Green River Crossing, a pleasant place to camp. Sheldon Cutler called it a good place for a small settlement. After Alfred Billings said there was plenty of feed and timber, cottonwood, men spent the morning bathing and washing clothes in the river. The weather was very hot. This is still spring, but when you find yourself in the deserts, that it'll happen. An Indian appeared on the opposite bank of the river. The man sat on his horse, watching the white men splash and frolic in the water. Ethan Petit, said one of the Indians accompanying the mission, shouted to the man and invited him to cross the river. The Ute hobbled his horse and swam the river to greet his kinsmen and get a better look at the strangers in the water. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, the missionaries invited the Indians to a church service. It was their first chance to become real missionaries. Gregory Metcalf and William Holden preached a sermon in the native tongue. Probably with a little help from High Forehead, the Indians sat attentively and received the lesson cordially. The Mormons all agreed that the Spirit of God attended the meeting. The Indians probably didn't understand most of the substance of the preaching, but apparently they were impressed with the sincerity of the effort. Filled with the missionary zeal, Oliver Huntington wrote in his journal, "They're the most honest and upright Indians I ever saw. They believe all we could make them understand." The next morning, the men began the arduous task of ferrying the wagons and cattle across the river. It was the 4th day of June, and... oh, that's why. Okay, so it's starting to get into June. Still spring, but yeah, that'll be toasty there. On the 4th day of June, it was hot weather, came with copious flow of melted snow water from the mountains to the north. The river was very high, and the men moved downstream about a mile to a better crossing site, and prepared a boat they had brought from Salt Lake City. The boat was mounted on wheels and used as a wagon until the river was reached. At the water's edge, the axles and wheels were removed. The boat caulked with hot tar and put in the water. The exact place they crossed the river is not known, but it was surely somewhere near the present town of Green River, where there were good approaches to the river on both sides. Above and below the town site, the river runs through steep hills and bluffs. That would have made exiting the river much more difficult, especially the wagons. At the crossing site, the wagons were unloaded and taken apart. By late that afternoon, a few of the cattle and the running gear, which is axles and wheels, of several wagons were safely across. The loss of one wagon wheel to the river was a serious accident. John McEwen said that they used a grappling hook to try and find the wheel, but the river would not give it back. The morning of June 5th, the river crossing began in earnest. Starting at 7 in the morning, the men ferried the wagons and gear all day, rowing the boat back and forth with strong backs and dogged determination. They said it took an average of 3 trips to ferry one wagon and its cargo. By late afternoon, the men were exhausted, but only 2 wagons remained on the western shore. Unfortunately, only 30 of the 84 cattle were safely across. The missionaries were having trouble convincing the cows to swim. On the other side, on the brighter side, Oliver Huntington wrote, "During our stay at this place, the Indians manifest no desire to steal the least thing. We kept a couple of herdsmen with our cattle in the daytime to keep them from straying, but let them loose at night without a guard." The missionaries were obviously impressed by this band of Sharebecked Utes. When the sun came up on Wednesday, June 6th, the river crossing was resumed once more. By late morning, all of the wagons were across, and the men began to reassemble them on the eastern shore. About 3 that afternoon, Lot Huntington and Stephen Moore arrived at camp with mail. They said they had lost their way trying to cross the mountains and had to backtrack. It had taken them 3 days to reach Manti. That would have been rough. Mailmen had been gone for 8 full days, but they brought back 7 newspapers and 20 letters, a real morale booster for the men. In the evening, the would-be cowboys tried a concerted effort to swim more cattle across the river, but succeeded in getting only 18 of the 54 across. With all of the wagons and most of the cattle now on the eastern shore, the men did post a guard that night. On June 7th, it was back to swimming cattle, but the landlubber livestock were still being obstinate. By noon, they had only 15 across. After lunch, the missionaries resorted to extreme measures. They found they could take 2 at a time by yoking a pair of oxen and towing them across the river behind the boat with a rope tied to the yoke ring. But some of the portly potential beefsteaks still refused to swim. Instead, floated across the river, according to Oliver Huntington. 2 cantankerous cows actually swam back across the river after being set free on the eastern shore, much to the chagrin of the boat-rowing cowboys. Finally, a setting sun and gathering darkness allowed a few remaining steers to rest up for the next day's adventure. On Friday, June 8th, the battle with the bovines began early. The men rounded up the remaining non-swimming remnant of the thundering herd with blood in their eyes. To the river they went with whips, chains, lassos twirling. But again, the oxen had to be towed across behind the boat, 2 at a time. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, all of the cattle were finally across, and the boat was taken out of the river. The river-running cowboys had shown remarkable restraint, because only 1 fat ox had broken a leg. To Oliver Huntington, that was good. That was good, for we needed beef. The men surely savored the prime rib in remembrance of all the cuss-worthy cattle, and had held them at the river crossing for an extra 3 hot and miserable days. The 3 days they had gained by taking the Elk Mountain cutoff had been lost. At 4 that afternoon, they took the trail and traveled about 10 miles before dark, camping at Celeratus Creek, probably Floy Wash. McEwen said that the water was terrible alkali, and there was no grass at the campsite. The men had to tie up the drip-dried oxen to the wagons to keep them from wandering off in search of grass during the night. According to William Pace and Ethan Petit, sometime during the day, a few of the men sent letters back to Manti with an Indian. No one bothered to tell who that Indian was. It is doubtful they would have sent a precious mail with an Indian they didn't know and trust, so the mailman might have been High Forehead. The Indian we have with us is never mentioned again. Saturday, June 9th, proved to be the longest travel day of their trek. The day's journey was south to 10 Mile Wash, then southeast along the north side of the Blue Hills, following the general course of today's Blue Hills Road, which is Grand County Road 138. McEwen said the road was sandy and very heavy traveling, only sage for fuel. That day they covered more than 25 miles to a well-established camping place on the old Spanish Trail. Evidently, the missionaries couldn't agree on a name for the place, and alternately called it the Big Rock, Petit, or St. Louis Rock, McEwen, Irony Springs, Pace, and Quinney Rock Springs, Pace again. Today, the area is known as Courthouse Rock and Courthouse Spring. In the 1800s, it would become a famous stagecoach stop between Moab and the railroad town of Thompson Springs. So, you remember in Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, where he's in Arches National Park finding the Cross of Coronado beneath Double Arch. For some odd reason, I didn't find that cave there. when I went there. But now, does this mean that Indiana Jones may have been a Mormon? I don't know. Could be. But yeah, there's rails that go right near where Moab is. It's not straight through Moab. I'm trying to see if there's anything on the map about what it was called, Thompson, I think. Thompson Springs, Utah. Oh, okay. Yeah, it is just north of. So the turnout, Thompson Springs is just past Crescent Junction. So as you take the turnoff to go south to Moab, if you stayed on just a little while longer, you'd get to Thompson Springs. So, and that is right along the rail line that goes along the road at that time. So, it's very likely that Thompson Springs is where Indiana Jones, as a young man, lived. Just saying. I'm trying to think if where else was there any rails? Because it follows along that, it crosses the Green River, the railroad goes to Thompson Springs. It would have been north of Arches. I mean, there's other places he could have lived, I suppose, if he's following the rail lines. Some Cisco, depending on how fast the train was going. I'm wondering if it would have been Frutia in Colorado. Depends on which way the train was going, too, because it could have been taking him to further into Utah. But I doubt that from the scenery. So, there you go. It could have been things like Price, or it could have been Thompson Springs. It'd be fun to speculate. Anyways. So, all right. Trail discipline and coordinated efforts broke down that day. And it became an every man for himself adventure. Starting before sunrise, the wagons became strung out for several miles along the trail because everyone was stopping to bait, which means feed, their teams wherever they could find a patch of grass. Water was found at various small pockets and springs, most of it brackish, according to McEwen. Small groups of nooned, meaning stopped to eat lunch, whenever and wherever their fancy took them. William Pace said one of the wagons broke a wheel, and several teams did not get to camp until very late. Things were better organized the next day. June 10th was Sunday, but the weather and adverse travel conditions prompted the Mormons to move on and not celebrate the Sabbath. Weather tremendous hot, according to William Pace. It was so hot that John McEwen and John Clark, who were helping to herd the loose livestock, became faint from heat exhaustion and lack of water. It says lack or water, but I think he meant lack of water. In desperation, McEwen said he milked a cow into the only container they had, his shoe. He and Clark filled the shoe with warm milk and drank it down 5 times. Later, they dug with their hands 18 inches into the hot sand of the dry stream bed and found enough water to satisfy their thirst. One of McEwen's ox gave out that day, the first ox to fail during the entire trek. Oof. The animal simply laid down and refused to get back up. The teamsters left him at the side of the trail and went on without him. Later, McEwen borrowed a horse and went back with 4 gallons of water and got the ox to drink. But prodding and coaxing could not get him to his feet. McEwen would try again the next day. After leaving camp that morning, the company traveled south about 12 miles to the top of Moab Canyon. The first 8 miles were traveled along a base of High Red Mountain to the west. After crossing 7 miles of wash, they were in the sand again until they started down the steep, rough, rutted descent of Moab Canyon. which John McEwen called Rock Canyon. 3 miles down, they came to the dreaded jumping-off place. Gregory Metcalf, who had been there before with William Huntington's scouting party, convinced Alfred Billings to send a road-building crew ahead that morning on horses to try to fix a road around the jump-off. The men were motivated. The very thought of dismantling 15 heavy-laden wagons and lowering them and their cargo over a 25-foot ledge with ropes was a strong incentive for finding an alternate route. They were able to do it. By the time the ox teams arrived at the jump, the road crew had fashioned a primitive path around it. The road was very steep and over the point of the hill near where the railroad tracks are today. Wait a minute, is there a railroad that goes to Moab? Wait a minute. I thought it stayed out of the Moab area. Was I wrong? Because it's just a road down that canyon. Is it? I'm wrong. It is right next to it. Well, now, that changes things where Indiana Jones could have been born. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. He could have been in Moab. Although the train in Utah, my goodness. I'm just so focused on the road whenever I go down to the Arches area that I forget that they've got rail lines going right next to the road. Okay, I think I see what they're talking about. But the rail line ends right there? Okay, so I suspect the jumping off place was kind of right near. So when you're going down the road, just as the canyon opens up, I suspect that would have been where the jumping off place is. And the railroad is kind of right next to that. And so it would have been a little north of or a little south of the jumping off place. It would have been a way to just on the side of the hill, steeply get around and follow the ledge down, that kind of place. Or it could have been right where it opens up into the actual mouth of the Moab area, which is like right here. And the railroad kind of goes on that end of the canyon. But at least on this map, it seems like the railroad just ends for some reason right there. And they kind of figured a way to have a little bit of a road right there. So either spot, I can understand what they're talking about, because then you get actually into the Moab region itself. So, pretty smart, guys. By the time the ox arrived at the jump, primitive point of the hill, steep siding, near where the railroad tracks are today. The journals also say the road was very steep and sidling following the side hill. But all of the wagons got through with double teams pulling and men walking alongside with ropes and poles to help keep the wagons from tipping over. Near the bottom of the long sandy hill, they found the Grand Colorado River and camped, arriving after dark. Of the work of the past few days, Oliver Huntington wrote, "Reached Grand River about 10 o'clock at night of 10th of June. It is 50 miles from Green to Grand River, and only 2 watering places for the teams between. That was a hard job for teams and men for want of water and from sand, and making a road through rocks and dugways." As the sun came up on June 11th, the missionaries got their first look at the promised land. Across the river, Elk Mountain Valley was beautiful. Red, rocky rims framed the valley, radiant when touched by the first rays of morning sunlight. The river bottom and valley floor, for a mile or more to the south, was covered with grass, sage, and willows. Stately cottonwood trees, resplendent in bright spring foliage, spread protective limbs above the floodplain of the river and dotted the valley toward the mountain. To the southeast, the Elk Mountains stood firm and resolute, overshadowing the valley with a solid, domineering presence that drew every eye upward to the sky. The mountain gathered from dark hills and cedar rims, forming a chain of sawtooth cones that projected high toward the morning clouds, like a dragon's back. Thin morning clouds painted the eastern sky with a blush of orange. At their feet lay the mighty Colorado River, swollen with heavy spring runoff, muddy but placid as she rolled past their camp. A stiff, cool breeze from across the river brought the smell of turbid water, swamp grass, musty compost, and sage. But as the men looked out on the marvelous scenic vistas that would charm the residents and travelers for the next 200 years, no member of the mission recorded a word about the scenery. You just got to experience it. It was Monday, but the missionaries celebrated the Sabbath a day late. They spent the day resting and preparing to cross the river. McEwen and Clinton Williams returned to the downed ox at the head of the Moab Canyon and took him another 4 gallons of good Colorado River water. They got the ox to his feet, but he couldn't use one front leg, and he gave out again after only going a mile. The men returned to camp without him. Back at camp, the boat was taken from its wheels again, and Alfred Billings took the mission's most experienced farmer, Ethan Petit, to get a look at the land across the river. After an uneventful crossing, they hiked up the valley a mile or 2 from the river, exploring the agricultural possibilities. Ethan Petit was impressed, he said. They found grass as good as the Salt Lake Valley on the 10th of July, a sure indicator of fertile soil. Anticipating that they might have trouble crossing the river with the oxen again, some of the men decided to start early. They got 15 cattle across that day. No one said if the oxen were towed across or swam on their own, but journalists say they had to stop when the wind became too strong for them to safely use the boat. Ethan Petit said there was a storm on Elk Mountain and the wind blowing strong from the south. It is assumed the men were crossing the river somewhere near the north of Moab Canyon, and not further upstream where the modern highway bridge is today. Early morning, somewhere near the mouth of Moab Canyon. Okay. Okay, yeah, so they're talking about river crossing, probably they're thinking probably somewhere near the middle, because you have the bridge right there, but the mouth of Moab Canyon is this big spot there, so probably just in the middle of that, instead of right near the cliff edges and such, which would make sense. You want to be on the flattest possible land as you're trying to make a river crossing, so it's easy to get in and get out on both sides, as they mentioned earlier when they were crossing the Green River. So, and most of Moab, the city, is kind of beyond the floodplain of the Colorado River. You see that you have this kind of wilderness green area, and then you have the city over there. So, not a bad idea, just saying. Floodplain's not a good place to build. Early morning of June 12th, John McEwen and Clinton Williams returned to the lame ox. This time, they took 5 gallons of water. With prodding, they got him to his feet, but he could not stand on 4 legs and fell down. They gathered armloads of bunch grass for the animal and left him there in the shade. Wagon master Joseph Rollins was put in charge of getting the remaining 70 cattle across the river. Undoubtedly, some of the men were antsy, but surprisingly, the cantankerous cows cooperated much better than they had done at the Green River. By the next afternoon, all of the livestock were safely across the river. Almost as an afterthought, the men mentioned Indians in camp that day, June 12th. Who they were and where they came from is not told. It must have been a different bunch from those the Mormon traveled with on their way to the valley. Oliver Huntington said they were apparently friendly, which speaks of unfamiliarity. Huntington further said an arrow was found sticking in Brother Ivy's ox about an inch. He said the arrow was shot by a small Indian boy whose father apologized by saying the boy could not shoot straight and it was an accident. Oof. That same morning, Alfred Billings chose 5 men to accompany him across the river. That kind of sucks. I mean, I feel really bad for the ox, and it really sucks because, jeez, if I were the dad of that Indian boy, I would have been like, yo, man, this is not a good thing to do, you numpty. Anyway. That same morning, Alfred Billings chose 5 men to accompany him across the river. They would explore the valley and locate a site for their farm and fort. According to Ethan Pettit, the 5 chosen were William Holden, Oliver Huntington, Ethan Pettit, Gregory Metcalf, and Lot Huntington. Metcalf and Lot Huntington, of course, had been there before, so they were acting as guides, not scouts. Ethan Pettit was the farming specialist, William Holden, an Indian interpreter, Oliver Huntington, the mission scribe. Ethan Pettit said the explorers traveled on horseback 20 miles up the valley to the crossing of Pack Saddle Creek. There, Gregory Metcalf and Lot Huntington located the cache made by the exploring party the previous winter. They made no attempt to raise the cache, expecting to come back later with shovels and remove the contents with their wagons. After leaving the cache site, they followed the Elk Mountain Pack Creek, back toward the river. Oliver Huntington reported the creek was abounding with the largest sage wood any of us had ever seen, which we took as an indication of good farmland. Explorers camped that night about 8 miles from the river near a spring. If their mileage is correct, they traveled 32 miles in the saddle that day. Wednesday morning, June 13th, the exploring party returned and reported that the best place for their fort was near the river. They also said that they had passed a deserted Indian village and farm in the middle of the valley along Elk Mountain Creek. Ever the farmer, Ethan Pettit assured everyone that the Indians' corn and melons were doing fine. Oliver Hunting reported their farms, little baby farms, were in natural openings among the sagebrush along the creek, where the land was very loose, rich, and sandy. He said the farm comprised about 10 acres planted in corn, melons, squashes, and pumpkins. Oliver explained that the natives didn't till the ground, but cleared the land of brush and grass, then dug shallow holes for the seeds. Brush, rocks, and dirt were arranged as small dams to catch rainwater to help irrigate individual plants. This method of farming was exactly what the Anasazi and Fremont peoples of hundreds of years before had done. John McEwen said the Indians got their seeds from William Huntington's exploring party the previous winter. But even if that was true, the Utes had planted their seeds in the manner of native cultures from antiquity, which shows the Utes knew something about agriculture without Mormon help. And the Utes were not the only Indians in Utah who knew how to farm. Mountain man Jedediah Smith told of visiting Indian farms along the Virgin River in southern Utah in 1826. That'd be near the St. George area. So if Moab is southeastern, St. George is southwestern. And so the Virgin River is kind of down there. Although, where else does the Virgin River go? Does it necessarily only in that area? Now I'm wondering. Yeah, Virgin River. Let's see here. I just always associate the Virgin River with St. George. Oh, that Sand Caves. That's another place I need to go I haven't been to. Come on, where's St. George? That's got to be St. George there. St. George, Utah. Oh, yeah, okay. So, yeah, the Virgin River kind of goes right in the middle of it. And it's a small, petite little spit of land. You have Quail Creek. So I guess the Virgin River, no, it passes by that reservoir and goes near Laverkin, Tokerville. Yeah, it's all in the southern Utah area. So it's coming from Kolob Canyon and all that kind of stuff. So it is really southwestern Utah. All right, let's continue on then. I was trying to see an origin. Sometimes that's fun. There's St. George, and the river kind of comes up along that way. All right. All right. So, he told of visiting Indian farms along the Virgin River in southern Utah in 1826, where he bought corn and pumpkins from the Paiutes. That was Jedediah Smith, so in southwestern Utah. Surprisingly, the explorers didn't report seeing any Indians during their journey to Pack Saddle Creek and back, even around the well-kept Indian farm. William Pace said the returning explorers told the rest of the company, "The Indians are off fighting the Mexicans." How they came to that conclusion is not told. Back on the north side of the river, James Ivey and John Clark returned again to McEwen's lame ox and offered him one last chance to fulfill his destiny as a beast of burden. The ox declined. The men got him up, but he fell over and could not walk. They shot him to put an end to his suffering. No one said they butchered the ox, but it's a safe bet they did. Meat was scarce and highly valued. All the journals report a very strong wind from the southeast that day. Crossing the river was too dangerous until late afternoon. Most of the wagons and equipment remained on the north shore that night. The next day, June 14th, the missionaries concentrated on moving the wagons and equipment across the river. But because it was mid-June, it was imperative that the seeds be in the ground as soon as possible. The men would need a crop to see them through the coming winter. 12 men were detailed to cross the river and break ground for a farm. Ethan Petit was put in charge of the farmers. Petit and his men cleared about 2 acres of the virgin land that day, but the roots and rocks did not give up willingly. They broke 2 plows. Glad they have the blacksmith's tools. They broke 2 plows and had to send them back to the company blacksmith for repairs. The wind blew hard all day. By the evening of June 15th, all the wagons, equipment, and livestock had been moved across the river. A semi-permanent camp was made where they would soon begin building a fort. The site was in or near a large grove of cottonwood trees, a short distance from their newly cleared farm fields. Sheldon Cutler called it a pleasant sight, but William Pace confided to his journal that he was not impressed with the location. The ground low with considerable saleratus. Saleratus? What is saleratus? Lena! S-A-L-E, saleratus. R-A-T. Saleratus, apparently. Sodium bicarbonate, potassium bicarbonate. So it would have been just white salty ground that they would know as sodium bicarbonate. Okay, so that's saleratus. President Billings and his... I did not know that, obviously. President Billings and his 5 site selecting advisors had picked the spot for their farm on the east bank of the Colorado River. The east bank? Okay. Oh, because it comes down. Yeah, all right. So they're sticking right near the Colorado River. The best place they could find, according to John McEwen. The exact location is not known, but Oliver Huntington offered some clues. On June 13th, he wrote in his journal, returned, having settled upon a grove near the bank of the river about 1 mile below our place of crossing. Many years later, Oliver is quoted in the Utah Genealogical and Historical magazine as saying, the company decided upon having the place of location on the east side of the river, near where it enters its perpendicular mountain-walled banks. From his descriptions, the farm was in the area of today's Scott Matheson Wetlands Preserve. The location was on the east side of the river, probably just a few hundred yards northwest of where Mill Creek and Pack Creek join before entering the Colorado River. Today, a nature trail to the Wetlands Preserve begins near Cane Creek Road and goes through the general area of where the farm was located. I think I've explored that area like once. Just because, if you found yourself with extra time in Moab, it's kind of fun to wander around. The missionaries could take irrigation water from the creek near the farm. The creek was below the elevation of the fields. Instead, they dammed Mill Creek somewhere up the valley where the elevation was higher and the water could be brought down to the high side of the fields. By doing this, the rate of flow could be controlled by the grade of the ditch. something very important with flood irrigation. Ethan Petit accomplished this difficult task using only rudimentary tools, speaks well of his engineering skills. However, his first effort was unsuccessful. The dam washed out during the night of June 19th and ruined the dam site. That's without swearing, by the way. It's the regular, actual, physical object site. Oliver Huntington said the farmers moved up the creek a mile further and took their water from a beaver dam. On June 20th, William Pace recorded all hands worked on water ditch, got water down 2 miles. John McEwen concurred, got water from creek and down the bend 2 miles. It should be noted that neither man says the water was all the way to the farm yet. It was the next day, June 21st, when Alfred Brillings reported, got the water running on the farm land, planted some potatoes. From this, it might be concluded that the ditch was little more than 2 miles long. Not bad for working the ground quickly. It should be noted that the 2-mile ditch was not dug using shovels. The usual method was to dig the ditch with a plow. In this instance, a plow pulled by a team of oxen. The plow would turn the dirt over and deposit it on one side of the furrow. The oxen were then turned around and driven back the other way with the plow in the same furrow to make the ditch deeper. That dirt would be deposited on the opposite side of the furrow, making a good ditch bank on both sides of the furrow. Men with picks, shovels, and axes would follow to dig out rocks, cut roots, or fix any other problems in the ditching process. That's smart. I never thought of that. That is cool. So that's the end of this chapter. I'm just trying to see if there's anything in these little notes here at the end that offer anything fascinating. Just speculation about small little differences. So you have Ethan Petit, Clinton Williams, John McEwen in the pictures down here. And then you have Courthouse Rock and Courthouse Spring, about 15 miles northwest of Moab, Utah. This was the important camping place on the old Spanish Trail, and later a stagecoach stop between Moab and Thompson Springs. And so here's the pictures. So there you go. Sounds like actually pretty good. Uh-oh. Next chapter is A Quiet Rebellion. Uh-oh. That's not good. All right. At least for this reading. What do I get out of this? Well, traveling hot and dusty trails where water is scant. It's having foreknowledge about what's around and what's available would be a godsend for the mind and morale, even though it was still probably terrible to try and cross all that terrain, which is unforgiving. Still having some semblance of, it's going to be okay, we're going to get there, we're going to be able to get water, get place, just having knowledge that it's possible to do and that there's places to be and ways to get there would help. So even during the worst of nights where there's hardly anything available, you could still go on and know we're going to get there. That's what I'm thinking about that part of the journey. I also think that, again, with preparation, because the jumping off place was so terrible, having foreknowledge of the troubles ahead, they were able to avoid those same troubles a second time. So, in many ways, if you want to take a spiritual lesson from this, it's take heed from those who have gone before. Listen to their tales of trial and woe so that you can avoid them. Learn from the bad examples in history, from stories, and from things that are happening in your life and people around you. This is why history books like this are kind of a great way to understand, not only about where history of where places that you live come from, but also the foibles of humans has not changed since the beginning of time. And so it's a good way to measure, well, what path am I on, and do I want to walk that same path? And most importantly, perseverance. in the sight of so many trials. So far, I mean, getting there sounds like, besides a couple of times where they were all just doing their own thing, I think mostly that they made it down there together, unified pretty easily. So when the next chapter is titled "Quiet Rebellion," I'm worried. I'm wondering if this is the start of their troubles, and I hope it doesn't say that bad. But we'll have to see. It's all the rest of this, just breezing by, seems quite interesting. Looks like there's a lot of dealings with the natives and other information, so we'll have to see what happens. I'm fascinated so far, and I hope that this gives you a sense of what it was like back then and all the trials they had to endure. We have totally different trials, but we're the same type of people. Because we're the same type of people, I hope we can learn to rely on providence, on God, and that way he can help bless us in whatever our endeavors are. I hope we can remember him and be grateful for everything he does give us, because frankly, when you actually understand history, you realize that, yeah, there's crappy stuff that's happening now, but it can get a lot worse. And more importantly, hopefully, by learning history, you can learn to endure during the times where it's a lot worse. But most importantly, learn to be grateful for every little thing, because we have it a lot better than we think. And should things regress back to where it was, there are ways to do it, and you can survive, and it can still be a blessed life. So just be grateful for what you have, and may God's Spirit always be with you. We'll see you.